In the winter of 1285, a Hungarian guard cast his gaze from fortified stone battlements on the eastern border, breath misting in the cold air, peering into the inky blackness beyond the Carpathian peaks. Then, a sound reached him, a chilling tremor that pierced the hearts of all who had endured the horrors 44 years prior, the rhythmic thundering of innumerable hooves, accompanied by a terrifying war cry, "Yura, Yura, Yura." The Mongols had returned. The guard's hand quivered as he reached for the alarm bell. Surrounding him, other sentinels froze, recognizing the dreadful sound. Some were old enough to vividly recall being terrified children in 1241, hidden in forests and caves as their world was consumed by fire. They retained the harrowing accounts of their surviving kin, memories of mass burials, deserted villages, and the ensuing years of starvation. Now, after decades, standing atop walls that hadn't existed in their youth, they heard those same battle cries reverberating through the mountains. One might presume to know the outcome of this narrative. We are all familiar with the tales of Mongol conquests, of Genghis Khan's seemingly unstoppable forces sweeping across Asia like an anthropomorphic natural disaster. We recall the scorched remains of Baghdad, where popular lore claims the Tigris River ran black with ink from devastated libraries and crimson with the blood of intellectuals. We know of Kiev's downfall, of Russian princes crushed beneath victory platforms, of the pervasive dread that gripped Europe as these Eastern warriors materialized on the horizon like a biblical scourge. And if you possess any knowledge of Hungarian history, you are likely aware that in 1241, the Mongol invasion didn't merely defeat Hungary, it obliterated it. They massacred roughly a quarter of the population, between 250,000 and 500,000 individuals. The most formidable kingdom in Central Europe was reduced to smoldering ruins and scattered remains. Contemporary scribes recorded wolves and wild animals reclaiming villages due to the utter absence of human inhabitants. Therefore, when those guards heard the Mongol war cries in the winter of 1285 and witnessed the Golden Horde's banners once again cresting the mountain passes, they had every reason to believe they were witnessing the end of their civilization for the second time within recent memory. Their predecessors had failed to repel the Mongols. Entire armies had been swept away like dust before a tempest. What hope could they possibly have? Yet here lies the extraordinary aspect, what renders this account worthy of telling, studying, and remembering. Their fears were unfounded. What transpired in 1285 was no mere repetition of 1241. It was fundamentally different. In fact, it was almost the precise inverse. Over the 44 years separating these two incursions, Hungary had transformed itself into something utterly unfamiliar to the Mongols, something they struggled to comprehend and ultimately could not conquer. The narrative of this metamorphosis stands as one of medieval history's most remarkable sagas of resilience, strategic genius, and sheer determined resolve. This is a story about extracting lessons from devastating setbacks, about the strategic patience and long-term foresight in an era where most rulers thought in terms of mere months and years, not decades. It speaks to the courage required to fundamentally restructure an entire society in the face of an existential threat. And it chronicles the moment when the irresistible force of Mongol conquest finally met an immovable object specifically engineered to halt its advance. However, to grasp Hungary's eventual triumph, we must first understand the catastrophic nature of their initial defeat. We need to rewind to April 11, 1241, to a place known as Mohi, and bear witness to what one chronicler would later describe as the day God turned his back on Christendom. King Baylor IV of Hungary was far from unintelligent. Let me be unequivocally clear from the outset, as it's easy to misinterpret the events as stemming from incompetence or cowardice. He was neither inept nor timid. By the standards of medieval leadership, he was quite a capable monarch who had successfully consolidated royal authority and presided over one of Central Europe's most powerful realms. When intelligence reached him in 1237 regarding a mysterious Eastern cavalry force annihilating everything in its path, he did take it seriously, to a degree. He heeded the warnings, acknowledged the gravity of the situation, and even initiated certain precautionary defensive measures. Nevertheless, I believe he never fully grasped the true magnitude of the impending catastrophe. The forewarning came from a Dominican friar named Julianus, who delivered a letter from Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan himself. In this message, Batu demanded Baylor's unconditional surrender of his entire kingdom to the Tatar forces or face utter destruction. Baylor reacted as most medieval kings would when confronted with such an audacious ultimatum from an unknown distant power. He disregarded it. This reaction was, in essence, quite understandable. Imagine a messenger arriving, claiming to represent an unknown empire and demanding complete surrender. Your likely response would be laughter. Two further warnings followed. In 1239, the Cumans, a nomadic group, arrived, fleeing with horrifying tales of cities reduced to ash, populations massacred, and an army faster than anything Europe had ever witnessed. Baylor offered them sanctuary, settling them along the T River, a decision that proved both insightful and problematic. The second alert came in early 1241 from Poland, which was already under invasion by a separate Mongol force. By then, adequate preparation was impossible. Baylor faced an issue that might seem minor to modern military strategists, but was a serious concern in medieval Europe. For generations, Hungarian kings had maintained exclusive control over castle construction. Only the monarch could authorize stone fortifications, built primarily along the western border facing the Holy Roman Empire. This was because strong, independent castles empowered independent nobles, posing a potential threat to royal authority. This policy successfully centralized royal power, but was about to cost hundreds of thousands of lives. When the Mongols entered Hungary in early 1241, there were almost no fortifications to impede their advance or protect the populace. The Mongol invasion of Hungary wasn't a single massive army, but 5 distinct forces, each a testament to coordinated strategy. The main contingent, estimated at 50,000 to 60,000 strong, led by Batu Khan and General Subutai, crossed through the Verki Pass in the northeast. The speed of their advance was terrifying, likened by European observers to lightning, a force of nature rather than a human army. They moved faster than warnings could be delivered, and faster than defending armies could mobilize. This was possible because the Mongols traveled light, with each warrior riding multiple horses, allowing them to alternate mounts and maintain a pace that would have exhausted European war horses in days. Baylor had personally overseen the creation of dense natural barriers along Hungary's eastern border, a project requiring months of labor and significant expense. Yet, specialized Mongol units cleared these obstacles in just 3 days, a stark contrast to the months it took to build them. Hungarian forces scattered throughout the country attempted to intercept them, but every attempt failed disastrously. An army under Archbishop Ugrin Shak of Kuksa engaged a Mongol contingent, which feigned retreat. The archbishop, believing he had achieved a great victory, ordered his heavily armored cavalry to pursue them into a swamp. The heavy European horses became irrecoverably mired in the mud. Mongol horse archers then encircled the trapped Hungarians, decimating them from a safe distance. The archbishop barely escaped with his life. By the time Baylor gathered his main army, likely between 80,000 and 100,000 men, his kingdom was already severely weakened. On April 10, 1241, the two primary forces finally clashed at the Saju River near Mohi. For once, the Christians held numerical superiority and a strategic advantage, occupying the western bank of the river while the Mongols were on the eastern side, controlling the only significant bridge in the area. The Hungarians encamped on the western bank. That night, when a small Mongol force attempted to cross the bridge, Hungarian crossbowmen repelled them with heavy casualties, leading to widespread celebration in the camp. They believed they had decisively defeated the formidable Mongols. Wine flowed and men celebrated. Anyone familiar with military history could predict what happened next. The repulse at the bridge was not a Mongol defeat, it was a ruse, a carefully orchestrated deception designed to lull the Hungarians into a false sense of security. While the Hungarians celebrated, Subutai was calmly executing a plan likely conceived days earlier. At dawn on April 11th, Batu Khan launched another assault across the bridge. This time, the attack incorporated a new element: catapults. The Mongols hurled projectiles at the Hungarian positions, but these were not merely stones. Contemporary accounts describe them as devices creating _1_ explosives or incendiaries that generated noise, smoke, and instilled absolute terror among the defenders. However, this frontal assault was merely a diversion. The genuine peril emerged from an unexpected direction. While Hungarian forces fixated on the bridge, Subutai had uncovered a shallow crossing several miles upstream. Under the cloak of night, as the Hungarians celebrated, Subutai's troops stealthily positioned themselves. Now, with Batu initiating a frontal assault, Subutai's cavalry executed a flanking maneuver, striking the Hungarian encampment from the rear. Confronted with imminent encirclement, the Hungarians reacted precisely as the Mongols had anticipated. They stormed out of their camp in a frantic effort to breach the developing cordon. It was then that the trap sprang shut. This situation underscored previous Hungarian misjudgments. The Hungarian camp suffered from disorganization. Tents were packed together, leaving no space for movement. Wagons, forming a defensive perimeter, inadvertently became a cage, trapping thousands of soldiers in a constrained area, unable to fight effectively or escape. When the Mongol assault began its systematic devastation, escape was impossible. Mongol archers, unequaled globally, unleashed arrow volleys into the dense human mass. As the Hungarians eventually broke free from their camp and attempted to flee westward, the Mongols deliberately left an opening in their encirclement. To the desperate Hungarians, this seemed miraculous. They surged through the gap in disarray, thousands abandoning their ranks and discarding their weapons. This was not compassion. It was a brilliant tactical ploy informed by psychological insights articulated by Sun Tzu centuries prior. Constructing a golden bridge for a retreating adversary. The Mongols understood that cornered individuals fight with fierce determination, but those offered an escape route will seize it, and fleeing opponents are easily slain. As the Hungarian army dissolved into a panicked rout, Mongol light cavalry pursued them relentlessly for miles. Methodically, they rode behind the fleeing soldiers, shot them with arrows, and proceeded to the next target. It was an industrialized slaughter. By nightfall on April 11th, between 60,000 and 70,000 Hungarian soldiers lay dead. In a single day, Hungary endured more military losses than many medieval kingdoms could muster entirely. Archbishop Ugrin Chak perished in the carnage. Duke Koloman of Slavonia, Baylor's brother, sustained fatal injuries. King Baylor himself narrowly escaped, riding furiously towards Austria, with Mongol pursuit detachments hounding him throughout his domain like a wounded creature. The Mongols had only just begun their true campaign. What followed was a year remembered by Hungarians simply as the devastation. The Mongol army, devoid of serious military opposition, spread across Hungary like a pestilence. They torched Pest, the significant city on the Danube's eastern bank. They swept across the vast Hungarian plain, destroying everything with methodical precision. This was not merely military destruction. The Mongols obliterated civilian infrastructure with the same thoroughness applied to military objectives. Villages were incinerated, farms razed, monasteries plundered, mills demolished, and bridges destroyed. They slaughtered livestock, ruined crops, and poisoned water sources. The casualty count was immense. Contemporary historians estimate that roughly a quarter of Hungary's populace perished during the Mongol invasion and its immediate aftermath, totaling between 250,000 and 500,000 people. Certain areas were nearly depopulated. The Great Hungarian Plain resembled a desert. Contemporary chroniclers recounted wolves and wild animals reclaiming villages due to the absence of human inhabitants. Yet a crucial detail emerged, one that would prove vital 44 years later. Not all fortifications succumbed. Indeed, the limited number of stone castles in Hungary withstood every Mongol assault. When the Mongols attacked Esztergom, the capital and largest city, they deployed 30 siege engines, catapults, and trebuchets, the artillery capable of reducing the formidable cities of China and Persia to rubble. They bombarded the stone walls with their entire destructive capacity. The walls held firm, their thickness and construction sufficient to absorb the impacts without substantial damage. When the bombardment failed, the Mongols attempted a direct assault. Batu Khan himself, Genghis Khan's grandson, personally spearheaded a desperate attack on the walls. He lost 30 of his personal guards in the endeavor. These were elite warriors, Batars, the finest among them. Crossbowmen cut them down from the battlements. The Mongols, unparalleled masters of siege warfare who had conquered fortresses across Asia, could not capture a single well-constructed stone castle in Hungary. Another stronghold that endured was the Croatian castle of Klis. The Mongols deployed their siege engines, hurling stones at its walls. The projectiles ricocheted harmlessly. After extended days of fruitless attacks, the Mongol forces capitulated and departed. These triumphs, though minor, represented glimmers of hope within an enveloping gloom. Yet they were significant beacons. Indeed, an observer was taking note. A crucial revelation was being absorbed. Robustly constructed and adequately defended stone ramparts possessed the capability to decisively halt the Mongol advance. In March 1242, with the same abruptness with which they had arrived, the Mongols vanished. News had reached Batu Khan of the passing of the great Khan Ogedei back in Mongolia, and Mongol succession protocols mandated the return of all prominent lineage members for the Kurultai. The council convened to elect a new Khan. Batu withdrew his troops eastward, leaving behind a realm so ravaged that its full restoration would span generations. King Bela IV re-emerged from his sanctuary on the Adriatic coast to witness his kingdom in utter devastation. Contemporary accounts recount his public display of grief upon seeing his demolished capital. The chronicler, Master Roger, authored a work titled, quote, 3:4, detailing horrors that would unsettle contemporary readers. Bela could have succumbed to despair. He could have focused exclusively on immediate recovery efforts. Numerous monarchs would have pursued precisely that course of action. However, Bela IV was destined to demonstrate himself as one of Hungary's most extraordinary rulers. As he surveyed the smoldering remnants of his dominion, his thoughts extended beyond mere recuperation. He harbored notions of retribution. He contemplated the inevitable subsequent invasion, certain that the Mongols would return. And upon their return, Hungary would be prepared. Not merely prepared to resist, but prepared to triumph. Before delving into how Bela revolutionized Hungary, if this exploration into medieval history and military strategy captivates you, please consider hitting the like button. It genuinely assists the algorithm in presenting this material to more history enthusiasts. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. Imagine embodying Bela IV in the summer of 1242. You stand amid what was once your capital city. The timber defenses are reduced to char and ash. The residences are rubble. Deceased individuals are still being collected from the thoroughfares. Your treasury lies empty. Your nobility is dispersed. You possess no discernible military. Funds are non-existent. You face a traumatized populace questioning whether divine providence has abandoned them. Most historical monarchs confronted with such a predicament would devote their remaining reign to simply regaining their former stature. Bela IV resolved to construct something unprecedented. He decided to fundamentally reshape Hungarian society, to overturn centuries-old customs, to stake everything on a future vision that most of his contemporaries likely deemed preposterous. The lesson from Esztergom and Cleves was undeniably clear once grasped. Stone fortifications thwarted the Mongols. Wooden palisades, earthen defenses, faith, courage, or cavalry charges did not, only stone. Yet, Hungary possessed scarcely any stone castles, perhaps a dozen significant ones throughout the entire kingdom, and constructing more was extraordinarily costly. Bela undertook a measure that must have appeared irrational to his era's inhabitants. He reversed centuries of Hungarian tradition. Through a series of edicts commencing in 1242 and continuing throughout his rule, he actively incentivized his nobles to build stone castles. He didn't just permit it, he encouraged it. He provided motivations, tax abatements, and political concessions to anyone willing to erect substantial defensive structures. Consider the political ramifications of this. For generations, Hungarian kings had fiercely protected their exclusive authority over military might. They recognized that formidable castles implied potent nobles, and potent nobles posed threats to royal dominion. Bela was intentionally fostering potential challengers to his own power because he grasped a more fundamental truth. A monarch who governed over ashes governed nothing. It was preferable to share power with formidable nobles capable of defending the realm than to maintain absolute control over a graveyard. It was better to risk future internal strife than to assure current annihilation. The transformation was breathtaking in its scope and celerity. In the decade following the invasion, 44 new stone castles emerged across Hungary. By the culmination of Bela's reign in 1270, that figure had nearly tripled to approximately 100 castles. To contextualize this, more castles were erected in a single generation than many European kingdoms managed over centuries. And these were not ordinary fortifications. These represented cutting-edge defensive architecture, incorporating every lesson learned from the Mongol incursion. They were strategically placed on hilltops, river bluffs, and any terrain offering natural advantages. They featured formidable walls, frequently 8 to 10 feet thick, engineered to endure bombardment. They boasted multiple defensive layers and provisions for prolonged sieges. Take Visegrad, for instance, constructed between 1246 and 1259 on a commanding eminence overlooking the Danube bend. This undertaking received funding from the dowry of King Baler's spouse, Queen Maria Lascaris. The monarch literally utilized his wife's dowry to fund the construction of this stronghold. This illustrates the seriousness with which he perceived the impending danger. This fortification commanded the river passage through the mountainous terrain, effectively preventing any military movement along the Danube unless Visegrad was engaged first or Buda Castle was considered. Prior to 1241, Hungary's capital was Esztergom. Subsequent to the invasion, Baler relocated the center of authority to Buda, precisely due to its superior defensive position atop Castle Hill, overlooking the Danube. The new capital was not merely reconstructed, it was re-envisioned as a fortified city capable of serving as a final stand if the Mongols were to return. However, Baler's initiatives extended beyond just castles. He entirely restructured the Hungarian military apparatus. The light cavalry, which constituted the majority of Hungarian forces before 1241, proved utterly inadequate against the Mongols, who excelled in their own warfare tactics. Baler redirected resources towards heavily armored cavalry, knights equipped to hold ground and engage in close combat. He recruited crossbowmen from Venice and various other Italian city-states. Additionally, he brought in the Knights Hospitaller and other military orders. These were not simply soldiers, they were professional military personnel who brought with them centuries of accumulated expertise. The societal engineering was equally transformative. Extensive areas of Hungary had been depopulated by the Mongol invasion. Deceased farmers contribute no taxes, and desolated land yields nothing. Baler initiated an aggressive campaign to repopulate his dominion, offering incentives to German, Polish, Italian settlers, and others from across Europe. Thousands arrived, bringing with them novel agricultural methods from their homelands, as well as new trades and skills. They established towns and villages on lands that had been reduced to untamed wilderness. Within a single generation, many of the most severely impacted regions saw their populations and productivity restored. Baylor further promoted mining and metallurgy, recognizing that economic robustness formed the bedrock of military might. He fostered the expansion of fortified towns, granting urban privileges to settlements that committed to maintaining defensive walls and citizen militias. In essence, he instituted a "5 strategy, a network of mutually reinforcing strongholds designed to greatly hinder any aggressor. Throughout these decades of profound change, continuous frontier raids from the east served as a constant reminder that these efforts were not theoretical. The Mongols had not forgotten Hungary. Small raiding parties consistently crossed the borders, probing defenses and testing the new fortifications. They were observing, learning, and awaiting their moment. Baylor's transformative agenda incurred certain costs. By granting nobles the right to construct castles and command private armies, he inadvertently sowed the seeds of future internal conflict. These fortified nobles grew increasingly autonomous and more inclined to challenge royal authority. The latter years of Baylor's rule witnessed escalating tensions between the monarchy and the magnates. Yet Baylor acted with full awareness. He made a calculated trade-off. He sacrificed the absolute centralized power of the Hungarian crown for a more immediate and crucial objective: survival. He was building a kingdom robust enough to withstand another Mongol invasion, even if it meant establishing power structures that might someday pose a threat to his own descendants. Upon Baylor IV's passing in 1270, after a reign spanning 35 years, he left behind a kingdom utterly transformed. Chroniclers would dub him the _6_, placing him alongside King Stephen I, who had originally established the Hungarian state in the year 1000. It is a well-deserved appellation. In numerous respects, what Baylor forged in the decades following 1241 was more extraordinary than the kingdom's initial establishment. His son Stephen V reigned for a mere 2 years before his death in 1272. The throne then passed to his grandson, Ladislaus IV. Ladislaus was only 10 years old when he ascended to kingship. His mother was a Cuman, one of the nomadic refugees who had fled the Mongols decades earlier and settled in Hungary. As Ladislaus matured, he increasingly embraced his Cuman heritage over the Hungarian Christian court culture. He adopted their attire, lived amongst them, and even engaged in relationships with Cuman women while neglecting his Christian wife. The Hungarian aristocracy and church hierarchy were appalled. The Archbishop of Esztergom declared what amounted to a crusade against his own king. The kingdom so meticulously rebuilt by Baylor was rapidly unraveling due to cultural and religious strife. By the 1280s, Hungary found itself in a state of barely contained lawlessness. Ladislaus was in conflict with the church. Nobles were warring among themselves over land and privileges, utilizing those castles Baylor had encouraged them to build as strongholds for private skirmishes. In 1282, the Cumans themselves revolted. Ladislaus successfully put down the rebellion at Lake Horde, demonstrating his potential as an effective military leader when needed. However, his relationships with both the church and the nobility remained fraught with animosity. To external observers, Hungary appeared frail, fragmented, and on the brink of collapse, precisely the kind of target the Mongols had habitually conquered to forge their empire. Consequently, the Mongols decided it was opportune for a second major invasion. The Mongol Empire of 1285, however, was not the unified, unstoppable force that Genghis Khan had established. Following the Great Khan's death and subsequent succession disputes, the empire had splintered into 4 primary khanates. The Golden Horde, which governed the western steppes and Russia, operated largely independently under its own command. In 1285, the true power within the Golden Horde resided not with the official Khan, but with a figure named Nogai. Nogai was every bit as formidable and ambitious as his more renowned predecessors. For decades, he had cemented his influence through military triumphs and political maneuvering, orchestrating campaigns from the Balkans to the Caucasus. He had vanquished Byzantine armies and established himself as an influential power broker in Eastern European politics. His ambitions were vast. Surveying a divided Hungary consumed by internal strife, he perceived a prime opportunity. He envisioned a chance to finalize the conquest initiated by Batu Khan to sweep across Central Europe and to solidify his legacy as a conqueror on par with Genghis himself. The immediate pretext was almost remarkably convenient. After Ladislaus quelled the Cuman revolt in 1282, numerous Cuman warriors, instead of submitting to forced Christianization, fled eastward. They entered Golden Horde territory, where they found employment within Nogai's ranks. These refugees provided Nogai with detailed accounts of Hungary's internal vulnerabilities, describing a young king scorned by his own nobles and excommunicated by his own church. They depicted a realm ripe for subjugation. Nogai made his decision. He would complete what Batu Khan had begun 44 years prior. In late 1285, as winter descended upon Eastern Europe with unusual severity, two massive Mongol armies breached Hungarian borders. The northern contingent, led by Prince Talabuga, advanced through the Carpathian passes, largely retracing Batu's earlier route. The southern force, under Nogai himself, swept through Transylvania. The Mongol strategy was elegantly simple. Both armies would devastate the countryside, lure out Hungarian forces, defeat them through superior speed and maneuverability, then converge on Pest to crush any remaining resistance. They anticipated this campaign would unfold much like the 1241 invasion, perhaps even more rapidly. What Nogai and Talabuga did not fully grasp was that they were not invading the Hungary of 1241. They were confronting something entirely new, a system meticulously designed and constructed specifically to thwart Mongol incursions. The Hungarian response bewildered the Mongol commanders from the outset. King Ladislaus IV did assemble a royal army, but it did not concentrate at a single point, awaiting a decisive engagement. Instead, Hungarian forces remained decentralized. Local magnates mobilized their own armies and reinforced their own castles. Rather than seeking a grand confrontation akin to Mohi, the Hungarians appeared content to allow the Mongols to advance. Talabuga's northern army was the first to experience the practical implications of this strategy. As they pressed deeper into Hungary, they discovered that every significant town was protected by stone fortifications, and every strategic position boasted a castle. The fortress at Reka, situated atop a hill in northeastern Hungary, steadfastly refused to surrender. The Mongols deployed their siege engines, hurling stones at Reka's walls, which held firm. These walls had been constructed by individuals well versed in siege warfare, engineered specifically to endure bombardment. While the Mongols were preoccupied with fruitless sieges, Hungarian forces relentlessly harassed them. Local commanders such as Roland Borsa, Amadeus Abba, George Baksa, and Peter of Saros led highly mobile units that ambushed Mongol foraging parties, isolated detachments, and supply lines, subsequently retreating to their fortified sanctuaries before the Mongols could retaliate. This constituted effective guerrilla warfare, executed by forces possessing secure bases for withdrawal. The Sekeli people, formidable Hungarian allied warriors inhabiting the Carpathian borderlands, proved particularly effective. They possessed an intimate knowledge of the terrain, every valley, pass, forest path, and river ford. They leveraged the mountains much like a skilled combatant utilizes terrain, transforming natural features into weapons against the invaders. The Traskow fortress in Transylvania became a persistent irritant for Talabuga. Defended by Sekeli warriors, it withstood multiple assaults. The Mongols would launch an attack, sustain casualties from arrows and falling stones, fail to make any headway, and be forced to withdraw. Each assault ended in failure. Each setback sapped morale and depleted resources. Concurrently, winter arrived with unusual harshness: snow, ice, and freezing temperatures. The Mongols had intentionally launched their invasion in winter, anticipating that frozen waterways and solid ground would enhance their mobility. However, they had overlooked the repercussions of winter on a campaign involving sieges against well-prepared defenses. This crucial miscalculation revolved around their primary asset: mobility. Their entire military strategy was predicated on swift cavalry, capable of covering vast distances and concentrating overwhelming force against isolated targets. Yet, wintertime Hungary, bristling with fortifications that resisted quick bypass or reduction, rendered this advantage entirely moot. The Mongols found themselves trapped in siege warfare they were ill-equipped to win, squandering resources without progress. Their vaunted mobility, their greatest strength, became irrelevant when there was nowhere to outmaneuver the enemy. Every objective demanded a protracted siege, and that winter's weather was exceptionally severe. Deep snow hampered movement, even for their hardy steppe ponies. Frozen ground made grazing difficult for horses, necessitating greater fodder carriage or procurement from a countryside already stripped bare. Nogai's southern army in Transylvania encountered similar frustrations. They managed to seize only one significant stronghold, the castle at Bon Mikod, a success that came at a steep price. Elsewhere, stone walls and resolute defenders brought them to a standstill. Local forces led by Vivo Roland Borsa orchestrated a brilliant defensive campaign, leveraging the mountainous terrain to funnel Mongol movements into killing zones and set devastating ambushes. Borsa, having studied accounts of the 1241 invasion, comprehended Mongol combat tactics and simply refused to engage on their terms. He harassed, ambushed, retreated, and repeated the cycle. The Hungarian militia forces warrant special recognition. These were not career soldiers but armed peasants, urban dwellers, and minor gentry, specifically organized and trained for local defense. They possessed intimate knowledge of their regions and fought with the desperation of individuals safeguarding their homes and kin. Crucially, they had strongholds to withdraw to under pressure. This defensive system proved exceptionally challenging to overcome, as it lacked a single point of vulnerability. By early 1286, likely around February, Talabuga and Nogai succeeded in uniting their forces outside Pest. Had they captured the city, the campaign might have been salvaged. But Pest was now reinforced with stone ramparts, defended by troops keenly aware of the consequences of a Mongol triumph. The city did not fall, its walls held firm. The Mongol commanders faced a critical decision: continue the campaign, besieging impregnable fortresses, losing men and horses to ceaseless harassment, or cut their losses and withdraw. They chose withdrawal. It was a rational decision, yet also an acknowledgement of defeat. The retreat, particularly Talabuga's northern route through the Carpathians, devolved into a nightmare. The very mountain passes that had channeled the Mongols into Hungary now became killing fields. Hungarian forces launched ambushes and vanished into the mountains. Winter storms trapped armies spread out along mountain roads. The meticulous discipline that had characterized their advance dissolved into something akin to panic. The Verki Pass, the same pass Batu Khan had traversed victoriously in 1241, became Talabuga's Valley of Death. Contemporary accounts depict his army being decimated by constant attacks as Hungarian forces picked off stragglers and supply trains. The retreat became a rout, and the rout became a catastrophe. Nogai's retreat was better organized, but he too faced relentless harassment and substantial losses. King Ladislaus IV, who had prudently avoided committing his main army to a decisive battle during the invasion, now pursued the retreating Mongols, making their withdrawal as costly as possible. The entire invasion spanned approximately 2 months, a mere 2 months compared to the year-long devastation of 1241. Some regions endured raids, but the heartland remained untouched. No major cities had fallen. The network of castles had endured. The populace had not been massacred. The Mongols had been halted. For the first time in their westward expansion, and since they commenced their global conquest under Genghis Khan, the Mongols had failed to attain their objectives and were compelled to retreat without achieving significant gains. The military power that had forged the largest land empire in human history had just been defeated by a kingdom they had nearly annihilated 44 years earlier. The ramifications extended far beyond Hungary's borders. Within the Golden Horde itself, this failure triggered a political upheaval. Talabuga held Nogi responsible for the catastrophe. In 1287, only 2 years following the Hungarian disaster, Talabuga orchestrated a coup and seized control. His animosity towards Nogai became overt. The Golden Horde was plunged into an internal conflict that would enfeeble it for years. Less than 2 years after their setback in Hungary, the Mongols launched another invasion, this time targeting Poland in 1287. They met with failure once more, encountering the identical issues. The Poles had assimilated the same lessons as the Hungarians. A Hungarian contingent led by Georgi of Sovar even participated in the Polish defense, sharing their insights and expertise. After these consecutive defeats between 1285 and 1287, the Golden Horde never again mounted a substantial invasion of Central Europe. Raids and border skirmishes persisted for decades, but the ambition of conquering Europe, of reaching the Atlantic Ocean, had perished amidst the snows of the Carpathian Mountains and outside the formidable stone fortresses of Hungary. By the 14th century, the balance of power had dramatically shifted. In 1345, a Hungarian army under Count Andrew Laki actually penetrated Golden Horde territory, vanquished a Mongol force in open combat, and annexed the region that would later become Moldavia. The roles had reversed. The pursuers became the pursued, and the formerly vanquished emerged as victors. However, the narrative isn't quite as unblemished as it might appear. Baylor IV's proposed solution to the Mongol menace inadvertently generated new complications that would plague Hungary for generations. Remember those numerous castles? By the 1280s, these fortified magnates essentially functioned as autonomous princes within their respective domains. They commanded their own armies, occasionally rivaling the strength of the royal army. They managed their own revenues and possessed strongholds capable of defying royal authority indefinitely. The very mechanism that had safeguarded Hungary from the Mongols was now internally fragmenting the kingdom. The 1285 invasion starkly highlighted this dilemma. King Ladislaus IV did assemble a royal army, yet the primary combat efforts were carried out by local forces under local commanders. Baron Roland Borsa routed Nogai's army. Count George Baxer and his allies dispersed the invading forces in the northern regions. The Shikili successfully defended their own lands. The king's contribution proved minimal. The barons drew an unmistakable conclusion. They did not require royal protection and were fully capable of defending themselves. Following Ladislaus IV's demise in 1290 and the extinction of the Arpad dynasty in 1301, Hungary descended into 8 years of brutal civil war. Competing magnates and foreign claimants vied for the throne. The kingdom, once united against the Mongols, disintegrated into warring factions. This historical episode contains a lesson that extends far beyond medieval Hungary. Occasionally, the remedies for our most pressing challenges inadvertently spawn unforeseen problems. Baylor IV confronted an existential threat and responded with a radical transformation that spared his kingdom from annihilation. Yet, that transformation fundamentally altered the power structure, thereby generating new instabilities. Was it a worthwhile trade-off? Had Baylor not initiated his castle-building program, Hungary might have been as thoroughly decimated in 1285 as it was in 1241. Therefore, from the perspective of sheer survival, The transformation was indispensable and unequivocally successful. However, the Hungary that emerged was distinct, more militarized, more decentralized, and more feudal. Power was more diffused, authority was more contested, and unity was more fragile. I'd appreciate your insights on this matter. What are your thoughts on this trade-off? Do you believe King Bela IV made the correct decision, even with the subsequent weakening of royal authority and the contribution to future civil wars? Was there an alternative path? Please share your perspectives in the comments, as I am genuinely interested in hearing diverse viewpoints on this historical predicament. Let's step back and analytically examine what truly transpired from a military and strategic standpoint, because the Hungarian victory in 1285 offers lessons that retain their relevance even in contemporary warfare. Firstly, it underscores the value of meticulous preparation and long-term strategic foresight. Bela IV did not merely react to the Mongol invasion with temporary fixes. He anticipated the subsequent invasion and systematically spent nearly 3 decades preparing. That exemplifies extraordinary strategic patience. Most leaders focus solely on immediate crises, whereas Bela envisioned 40 years into the future and made decisions that would only bear fruit after his own death. Secondly, it highlights the critical importance of learning from defeat. The 1241 invasion was a catastrophe, but it also served as an education. The Hungarians discovered that light cavalry was ineffective against Mongol horse archers. They learned that wooden fortifications were useless. They learned that concentrating their forces for a single decisive battle was suicidal. But they also learned what proved effective. Stone castles worked. Crossbowmen fighting from entrenched defensive positions worked, dispersed resistance worked, and defensive depth worked. And the Hungarians did not merely reconstruct what they had lost. Rather than just rebuilding, they rebuilt with greater intelligence. In contrast, the Mongols failed to learn or adapt. When they returned to Hungary in 1285, they essentially employed the same strategy, expecting to achieve similar outcomes. They had fallen victim to their own past successes, presuming that what had worked in China, Persia, and Russia would be effective in Hungary as well. A third critical element was the formidable impact of defensive technology. The Mongols were conquerors of vast empires. They had triumphed over armies significantly larger than Hungary's, yet they were unable to overcome well-fortified stone walls defended by capable troops. All their tactical brilliance, their unparalleled mobility, and the advantages that had made them seemingly invincible became irrelevant when faced with fortifications they couldn't breach. The Mongols thrived on engaging their adversaries in mobile warfare. Stone castles, however, offered no such opportunity. They simply stood firm, compelling the Mongols to undertake protracted sieges, a process that consumed considerable time and capitalized on none of their inherent strengths. This demonstrates a recurring theme throughout military history. While offensive military power often garners more attention and glory, defensive technology and strategies frequently dictate the actual results. Whether it was castles in medieval Europe, trenches during World War I, or anti-tank defenses in World War II, the capacity to deny an attacker an easy victory is often more crucial than the ability to launch an effective offense. Fourth, the significance of an asymmetric response. The Hungarians wisely chose not to challenge the Mongols in mobile combat, recognizing they couldn't win a mobile war against the world's most proficient mobile warriors. Consequently, they didn't attempt to. Instead, they devised a defensive system that entirely neutralized the Mongol advantages. They compelled the Mongols to engage in a different type of conflict, one where Mongol strengths were inconsequential and Hungarian preparations were highly effective. This represents crucial strategic thinking that extends well beyond medieval warfare. Nations frequently make the error of directly competing with adversaries in areas where the opponent possesses a clear advantage. However, sometimes the intelligent course of action is to completely alter the fundamental nature of the competition. Fifth, the benefit of dispersed resistance and an in-depth defense. The Hungarian defense in 1285 wasn't dependent on the king or a single royal army. It relied on an interconnected network of local forces, each protecting its own territory, yet collectively creating an environment that the Mongols found impossible to navigate. If the Mongols destroyed one force or captured a single castle, it didn't trigger a widespread collapse. There was no solitary point of failure. Contemporary military strategists would identify this as defense in depth. The goal isn't to halt the enemy at a single line. Instead, you establish multiple layers of resistance, forcing the enemy to contend for every objective, and thereby denying them the decisive victory they seek. And finally, the paramount role of morale and psychological factors. The Hungarians in 1285 possessed a different psychological makeup than those in 1241. By 1285, Hungarians fully understood the Mongols' capabilities, but critically, they also knew that the Mongols could be stopped. They had constructed an entire kingdom based on this understanding, possessing confidence derived from thorough preparation. The Mongols, conversely, approached the invasion with arrogance, stemming from too many effortless victories. They failed to adequately respect their adversary, an overconfidence that led to significant strategic and tactical miscalculations. I want to devote some focused attention to Baler IV, specifically because I believe he is one of the most overlooked figures in medieval history. His accomplishments deserve to be placed alongside those of more widely recognized state builders such as Alfred the Great or William the Conqueror. When Baler returned to Hungary in May 1242, he was already in his mid-50s, an advanced age for medieval times. He had just witnessed the destruction of his kingdom in the most catastrophic military defeat in Hungarian history. He had fled across Europe, suffered the loss of family and nobles, and seen his life's work undone. He had every valid reason to simply concentrate on survival, to reconstruct what was lost, and to wish for a peaceful conclusion to his reign. Instead, he embarked on one of the most ambitious state-building endeavors in medieval European history. The castle construction program alone was an immense undertaking. 44 castles were built in 10 years, and nearly 100 by the end of his reign. This was more than just construction. It represented a complete overhaul of Hungarian society and its economy. Each castle necessitated quarrying stone, transporting materials to elevated locations, employing skilled masons, and organizing thousands of laborers. This constituted engineering on an epic scale, a logistical challenge that would test even modern nations. And Baler accomplished it through sheer determination. Yet, he didn't merely build castles. He reconstructed the entire administrative framework, reformed the military, attracted thousands of new settlers, stimulated mining, fostered the growth of towns, restructured the currency, and engaged in diplomatic outreach. He successfully maintained Hungary's standing as a significant power in Central Europe. This man rightly deserves to be considered among history's great nation-builders. What he achieved over 28 years stands shoulder to shoulder with the accomplishments of more widely recognized figures who operated under advantageous circumstances. However, due to the preferential treatment of Western European history in English-language education, Bela IV largely remains an enigma outside the borders of Hungary and Central Europe. This reflects a significant failing within our educational framework. Frankly, I find this oversight quite regrettable. American students who delve into comprehensive accounts of English monarchs, whose feats often pale in comparison, should also be introduced to the Hungarian king who inherited a ravaged kingdom and forged it into the bulwark that halted the Mongol thrust into Europe. Chroniclers appropriately dubbed him the _7_, drawing a parallel between his achievements and those of Saint Stephen I, who established the kingdom in 1000. In many aspects, Bela's work was even more remarkable than the original state's genesis, given that he had to reconstruct from desolation amidst perpetual peril. Upon his death in 1270, he left behind a fundamentally altered kingdom. The extensive network of fortifications would defend Hungary for centuries, while the emerging towns would burgeon into significant urban centers. The new settlers, over generations, would drive development. But perhaps his most profound legacy was one of fortitude, demonstrating that utter defeat did not necessitate permanent subjugation. He proved that astute planning and preparedness could conquer seemingly insurmountable obstacles. This legacy merits remembrance, for its lesson extends beyond medieval military strategy. It speaks to human tenacity, the efficacy of long-range vision, and the potential for rebirth even after the most devastating calamities. So, as we conclude our narrative, I want to circle back to that guard on the ramparts in 1285, listening to Mongol battle cries reverberate through the mountains, witnessing the banners of the Golden Horde cresting the passes, observing the horizon darken with approaching horsemen. Yet, history did not repeat itself, because between 1241 and 1285, transformative changes had occurred that the Mongols failed to perceive until it was too late. The Mongols arrived in Hungary, anticipating the same vulnerable kingdom they had devastated 44 years prior. They expected wooden palisades easily incinerated, expansive plains amenable to cavalry maneuvers, and armies massing for decisive engagements where their superior mobility would assure victory. Instead, they encountered an impenetrable network of stone fortifications, a decentralized defensive system impervious to their mobility, and a populace meticulously prepared for 4 decades to resist them. The 1285 invasion lasted 2 months and yielded no strategic gains. No major cities succumbed to Mongol assaults. No pivotal battles crippled Hungarian military might. As they retreated, Hungarian forces relentlessly harassed them back to the frontier, transforming the withdrawal into a running battle that decimated Talabuga's northern army. The catastrophe at Verki Pass served as a poignant counterpoint to the earlier triumph at Mohi. The same location, the same mountain pass, but diametrically opposed outcomes, separated by 44 years of profound change. In 1241, Batu Khan had swept through Verki, leading a conquering force. In 1286, Talabuga retreated through the identical pass with the shattered remnants of a defeated army. For the Mongols, 1285 marked the decline of their westward expansion, as they never again launched a major invasion of Central Europe. The myth of Mongol invincibility was shattered against the walls of Hungarian castles. For Hungary, it was a profound vindication of Bela IV's foresight. However, it also ushered in new difficulties. The newly powerful nobility would spend the subsequent decades tearing the kingdom apart through internal conflicts. The Arpad dynasty would cease in 1301, succeeded by 8 years of civil war. The reality of historical victories is their inherent messiness. They invariably carry costs that are not immediately apparent at the moment of triumph. The Hungary that repelled the Mongols in 1285 was vastly different from the Hungary of 1240. It was more militarized, more decentralized, more fractured, but crucially, it was alive to confront these new challenges. Its population hadn't been massacred in another genocidal invasion. The kingdom hadn't been obliterated and erased from the map. The cultural identity of Hungary endured intact. And when contemplating a confrontation with the Mongol Empire at its zenith, mere survival constitutes a victory. The broader message transcends the specificities of 13th-century warfare. It emphasizes resilience and adaptation in the face of existential threats. The gravest disaster in Hungarian history catalyzed a transformation that ultimately preserved the kingdom. The survivors of 1241 could have despaired, believing resistance futile, that the Mongols were simply too powerful to overcome. Instead, they candidly analyzed what transpired. They pinpointed both effective techniques and shortcomings. Every weakness was systematically addressed. Their entire society was fundamentally reshaped based on the harsh truths learned through immense struggle. And when put to the test again, these insights led to a complete triumph. This principle extends far beyond ancient warfare or military accounts. Whether confronting individual setbacks, organizational hurdles, or national crises, the underlying pattern remains consistent. Defeat can be instructive if one is prepared to honestly and thoroughly learn from it. Catastrophe can serve as a catalyst for profound change if one is willing to adapt fundamentally and commit to long-term preparation. The crucial element is whether you possess the insight to discern what must be done, the resolve to actually execute it despite difficulty and expense, and the patience to pursue strategies that may only yield dividends decades later. King Bela IV demonstrated such insight, resolve, and patience. The Hungarian nobles who constructed those fortifications and trained those militias displayed an unwavering dedication to a defensive strategy that demanded decades for its full implementation. The soldiers who defended the ramparts in 1285 exhibited courage stemming from meticulous preparation and the conviction that their defense system would succeed. And thanks to all of them, due to their collective efforts across 2 generations, when the Mongols returned anticipating an effortless conquest, they instead received a harsh lesson that would resonate throughout the ages. Some defeats remain defeats, but others lead to greater strength. In 1241, Hungary experienced the sheer destructive power of its most absolute and dreadful form. In 1285, they demonstrated to the Mongols what determination entailed, what preparation looked like, and the outcome when a society wholly committed itself to resisting a particular menace. The purported unstoppable force had finally encountered an immovable object. And for the first time in Mongol history since Genghis Khan unified the tribes, it was the aggressor that broke. Consider that for a moment. The Mongols had dominated from Korea to Poland, from Siberia to the Persian Gulf. They had vanquished every significant power they encountered. Chinese dynasties crumbled before them. Islamic caliphates fell. Russian principalities surrendered. Yet here, in this comparatively small kingdom in Central Europe, they met their match. Not through superior cavalry or brilliant battlefield maneuvers, but through something far more fundamental: the unyielding resolve of a people who refused to be victims twice. The impact of 1285 reached far beyond Hungary's borders. Other European kingdoms observed closely. They recognized that the Mongols could be halted, that proper planning and defensive strategies could neutralize even the most formidable military machine. The insights gained by Hungary disseminated across medieval Europe, influencing fortification design and military doctrine for generations. In a profound sense, King Bela IV's foresight didn't just preserve Hungary, it reshaped European perspectives on defense and readiness for future threats. And there is a deeply human dimension to this narrative that resonates across centuries. It isn't about advanced technology or overwhelming numbers. It's about a community facing annihilation, surviving by a thread, and then consciously deciding to transform themselves so thoroughly that when the danger reappeared, they were ready. It's about elder generations cultivating resources they would never personally benefit from. It's about current sacrifices made for future security. It's about rejecting the notion that the past dictates the future. If you've watched this far into the video, I appreciate you staying for this in-depth exploration of medieval military history and strategic transformation. This level of detailed historical analysis typically isn't covered in a standard history class. Yet I believe these narratives hold significant value. They illuminate the remarkable capabilities of humanity when individuals are willing to learn, adapt, and dedicate themselves to long-term objectives. If you found this engaging, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future content. We will continue to uncover these extraordinary historical accounts that warrant greater recognition. Feel free to leave a comment detailing your thoughts or suggesting other historical subjects you'd like to see examined in this manner. Did Bela make the optimal decision? Could there have been an alternative path? What are your views on the trade-offs between centralized authority and defensive capabilities? I make an effort to read every comment and genuinely value your perspectives. Please share this video with anyone you know who values accurate history, enjoys detailed analysis, and appreciate stories of resilience and strategic thought. Share it with that history professor friend who is always seeking excellent examples of strategic change. Share it with students who may be studying medieval Europe and need to understand that history is more than just dates and monarchs. To disseminate these narratives, often overlooked in standard historical education, yet unequivocally deserving of attention. Indeed, the most potent force throughout history isn't mere subjugation. It transcends military supremacy. It isn't defined by the capacity to annihilate adversaries. Instead, the profoundest historical engine lies in refusing to remain subdued, in the steadfast resolve to recover from losses, in the readiness to extract lessons from disaster and emerge more robust. It embodies the quiet fortitude of constructing something in the present that may only reveal its true value years, even decades, into the future. Furthermore, it encompasses the insight to grasp that genuine power extends beyond simply triumphing in conflicts. It involves forging frameworks and institutions designed to ensure future generations, your children and grandchildren, are spared from confronting the very struggles you endured. Hungary exemplified this in 1285, and this valuable insight resonates through subsequent centuries, relevant even to our contemporary era. Irrespective of whether you're grappling with individual hurdles, career misfortunes, or endeavoring to create a legacy, the fundamental tenet holds true. Glean wisdom from missteps, strategize for the distant future, and never resign yourself to permanent vanquishment. I appreciate your viewership and anticipate our next interaction.